Hello, Game Freak, Pokemon fans, Pokemon people. I am a longtime Pokemon fan, longtime Pokemon enjoyer. I've played every single Pokemon game since I first played Fire Red when I was around 12 years old, and I'm 30 years old now, having gone through every single game and enjoying all of them. Ever since I was a kid, I remember being issued the mission of becoming the very best that no one ever was, to become the Pokemon Master and to catch them all. And I've been working diligently on that since that time. As you can see here in my Pokemon home, I took some screenshots from my phone. I've got 1,006 of the Pokemon in my Pokedex, and I've got 1,886 Pokemon deposited into Pokemon Home in total. And I've just finished playing Pokemon Violet, and I can tell that Game Freak listened to the fans. The fans were asking for an open world where you could see the Pokemon naturally in the wild. And Game Freak delivered, and that means a lot when you see a company listen to what its fans asked for. So I really appreciate that, Game Freak. But as I've been playing these Pokemon games, there's something that is bothering me to my core. And for the first time, I felt so compelled that I had to make a video about this, the first video I've ever made discussing a game that I've played. Now, I want to show you this picture right here, where in every single generation I've played, I've brought in the Pokemon and made my team of 6, right? First generation, second generation, third generation, and so on. And this first generation and all of the others, they're brought in all the way from the Game Boy, right? So this right here is Fireball. And this is my Charizard. This is the first Charmander that I ever caught when I was 12 years old on the Game Boy. And I caught this Charizard when I was having my parents drive me to a dog shelter. And we were going, a dog breeder actually, and we were going to get my first dog, right? And as we were going, I got my Charmander and I decided I would name it Fireball. And then I saved the game and we got out of the car and we went to go look at the dogs, and this dog came up to me and it was so cute, and we decided to get it. My parents asked me, what do you want to name the dog? And I thought, let's name it Fireball, right? And my parents were so nice, they decided that they would let this silly name be given to the dog. And so we named the dog Fireball. And I loved this dog, and I started bonding with the dog, and we drove home, and the dog sat next to me, and I kept playing Pokemon, and I was playing with my Fireball Charmander, petting my Fireball dog, and, I had all these great memories playing this game next to my dog, and it felt like this was my partner. This was my partner Fireball and my partner dog, and we'd go out to my neighborhood, and I'd walk around with my game, and it felt like I was out in the world, playing Pokemon, and the real world would remind me of the game as I was out with my dog. I would go on a walk with my dog, and I was like, I'm taking Fireball out. And then I'd go back inside, and I'd keep playing with Fireball in the game, and it was really beautiful. And eventually, as I got older, we had to send my dog to my grandma's house because we were getting busy, and my grandma offered to take care of it, and she had a big farm and a bunch of other dogs that it could be friends with, and so we sent it there. And every time I would get sick, I would go over to my grandma's house, and I would bring my Game Boy, and I would play the game, and I'd sit next to my dog, and I would pet it, and this continued. I would bring my Nintendo DS, and this continued throughout the games. And, I really loved my dog, and I loved those memories. And eventually, my dog passed away. And as my dog passed away, I had this Fireball to remember my dog, right? And eventually I got older, and my grandmother passed away as well. And, then we had to sell the farm, right? And as that happened, we kind of arose to this point where the only memory that I have of these beautiful times with my dog and my grandmother and this farm that we all had is this Fireball. This is the only thing that's really left of those memories for me. And because of that, it's something that's really precious to me. You can see it's level 100, right? This is the Fireball on my phone. And I brought this Fireball into every single Pokemon game since the Game Boy. It's been with me in every game. And I love it. And it's something that is completely irreplaceable. It doesn't matter how many Pokemon you guys introduce, how many new Pokemon you create, how cool they are, how powerful they are. Doesn't matter how many new types of Charizards you make, how many shiny versions, how many markings. There's absolutely nothing in the world that can replace this Fireball. This is the most valuable Pokemon that will ever be released by Game Freak to me. And nothing can beat it. This is my Charizard. This is my Charizard, my Fireball, and I love it. And, every time I go to play a game, I'm so excited to bring in my Charizard into this new game, to bring it forward, a new generation of my Charizard and my memories of my dog and my grandma on the farm and my childhood. And, I start playing the game, right? And obviously we don't use this Charizard because in the beginning you're using all these new Pokemon, and that makes sense because you want to try them out, right? And so that's cool and it's a fun experience. But then as you beat it and, you're able to bring them in, what happens is there's no reason for me to use this Charizard because it feels like a waste. Because every time I'm using it, it's just a moment where I could be giving that experience to another Pokemon that is not level 100. It feels like a waste to use a level 100 and train it. So I keep it in the box, right? And I train the others. And then after all of it's done and I complete the Pokedex, we get to the post-game and competitive Pokemon. But in competitive Pokemon, that's a mathematical situation, right? What I would do for competitive Pokemon is I would try to be competitive and I would try to win. And so to win, I would run an AI simulation where I would have all of the Pokemon and all of their different movesets and all their combinations, and I'd run it millions of times to see what is the winning team. And that team, unfortunately, does not include my favorite Pokemon. It doesn't include this Charizard. And so I end up not being able to use it in competitive either. And as a result, there's no place for me to use this Charizard in the game, the main game, in the post game, or in competitive Pokemon. And as I beat Pokemon Violet, I'm just left with this feeling of emptiness where I didn't get to play with my favorite Pokemon. I didn't get to play with the Pokemon that I really cared about. I didn't get to play with Fireball. There was no incentive, no reason to play with Fireball. Not competitively, not in gaining levels, not in the story, nothing at all. And this has been true for many generations. And, this really goes beyond just my Fireball. You see, I've got memories with all of these Pokemon. This entire box of my team, most of these guys are level 100. This Tyranitar right here, who I played with shortly after, I remember I put him, he was still on Game Boy, with a team of this Fireball, and I had him and Fireball, and I had wonderful memories feeling like so powerful as a child at a county fair with this Tyranitar, and it made this Tyranitar invaluable because of my childhood memories with it. And there's no reason to use this, or this Mewtwo that I love, or this Groudon that I love. None of my favorite Pokemon did I get to use for any reason in Pokemon Violet, or any of these generations. And it left me feeling just really empty about these game mechanics and really wanting to be able to use my Pokemon. And so, I started thinking about this, and I went and I asked ChatGPT a question, right? And I just said to ChatGPT, if everybody in the world could only pick 6 Pokemon that they could use forever, and they could never use any new ones, and that was their permanent team, and then all of those were aggregated together, what would the 6 be? And I went through some prompts to refine it to make sure that it understood my question properly. And eventually it got down to the answer. And look at what number 1 is. Charizard, right? And so I know I'm not the only one who feels this way. I know I'm not the only one with a special Charizard. And funny enough, look at the other ones on this list. Mewtwo, who I mentioned. Tyranitar, right? And Rayquaza I love, right? These are some of my very favorites who would be in my top 6. It perfectly predicted this for me. And I'm sure this is true for many, many other people. And so I asked ChatGPT about this. I articulated through how, basically, I put it like this, right? You've got these level 100s after decades of play, but they're totally useless in the main games because you can't keep leveling them, so they're not worth using. And it's a waste when you could level another. And there aren't any in main games where you can use them competitively because it's going to be a mathematical calculation and they're not going to be part of the team. So it's like there's this gap where there's no actual content produced for the Pokemon that people actually want to play with the most. And ChatGPT's answer was very interesting to me. It points out that this design tension is a strange gap, right? Where the Pokemon that people are most emotionally attached to are often the Pokemon that the games give them the least reason to actually use, right? And it goes through and it talks about this. And at the very end, it says something that I think is so interesting. It says, what if Pokemon had a legacy mode where your original Charizard from 1998 could still adventure forever, but the game scaled around it? And this next sentence is what's so important. I suspect many players would spend hundreds of hours with their childhood Pokemon instead of constantly replacing them. And I can tell you, for me, this is 100% the truth. And, I was thinking about this as a kid, and I remember that this is exactly what I wanted as a child. I wanted to train my Charizard and my Tyranitar to the highest level, to where I could meet a trainer and destroy them with my Pokemon, because my Pokemon I put so much more time into because it was my Charizard, right? And it wasn't because it had the highest base stats that you could calculate and it was the most competitive when capped at level 50. It's because it was my favorite, and it's the one that I loved and had an emotional connection to, and it's the one that I trained to the highest level, higher than anyone else, because I put more time into my Charizard, and that's why I was able to win against the other trainer. That's what I would dream of as a kid. And, I'm sitting here looking at Pokemon Home, which I'm paying $10 or $4 a month for. And I'm thinking, guys, right now I'm paying, $60, $40 to $60 every 4 years, something like that. Well, guys, I would be more than happy to pay $20 every single month if the ability to play a game for my Charizard, for my favorite Pokemon, where I could level them up to whatever level I want, where I could get them to the highest level and meet other trainers live time in the game, right? And battle them with my favorite Pokemon, with my team from my childhood, all my level 100s, all the level 100s in this box that there's absolutely no content for whatsoever, that are also my favorite Pokemon. And this is true for everybody. This is true for all the players. After decades, we've all got Pokemon in our boxes, level 100, we can't do anything with, but there are actual favorites. And we're all paying this monthly subscription fee, which is already the monthly MMO model. And so I humbly ask you guys, I humbly am bringing in a request that we remove the level caps and provide a game where I can play with Fireball, because that's what I actually want to play. After all of these games that you guys have been putting out, all of these new Pokemon, this is the Pokemon I want to play with. And there will never be a Pokemon released that is going to outdo Fireball. This is my Fireball. This is my Charizard. And this is the Pokemon I want to play with. And so that's the first request that I make humbly and sincerely. And I want to just reiterate that, as ChatGPT said, this is something that people would spend hundreds of hours doing. They would pay for this monthly, and it would be incredibly profitable. And, basically every time you put out a new Pokemon mainline game, it would act as a DLC, right? An expansion pack where you could bring new Pokemon into this MMO Pokemon Home game where you have your level 756 Fireball that you've been training for the last 30 years. And the best thing about this is it wouldn't affect competitive Pokemon at all, because you still cap all the Pokemon at 50, you still run the official tournaments, and you still keep all of that just as it is. But it adds this other layer for people like me who want their competition not to be based on which Pokemon have the highest programmed in base stats, but based on which Pokemon are their favorites, right? I want my Fireball to be able to defeat, Arceus, not because his base stats are higher, but because it's mine and I trained him to be stronger. And that's what I've wanted ever since I was a kid. That's what I've always wanted. And so that's my first sincere, humble request. And there's a second thing which compounds this. This is my second and final request, and I greatly appreciate you listening to this if you do take the time to. And this gets down to the shinies. And the shiny Pokemon have legitimately come to the point where they have made it impossible for me to enjoy the games. And I'll tell you exactly why. Because they lead you down a couple different paths. The first thing that you can do is you can decide to hunt. Well, actually, let me start with this. My objective is to build the strongest team possible, the most ultimate team. And what that ultimately means is that they're also the rarest form of the Pokemon that they can be, right? And that means that they're all shiny. And that's what I want, an all shiny team eventually at the end. And so to get an all shiny team at the end, there's a couple things you can do. The first thing is you can start doing it at the very beginning of the game. But if you do it at the beginning of the game, it's a waste, right? Because first of all, you don't have the shiny charms, you're wasting your time. And second of all, and more importantly, you don't know what Pokemon are actually in the generation. And so you might end up, spending all this time breeding a shiny that is not even in your final team, right? And so for that reason, you don't do it in the beginning. And that's how you guys designed it, right? So, okay, that makes sense. But then you go to the end and you get the shiny charm and you start breeding these shinies. But what happens is you breed your shiny Pokemon, as I did here. I got this shiny Charizard. And I, by the way, think this is one of the coolest shinies in the game. I love the color scheme much more than the original. It's black and red, my two favorite colors. I think it's awesome, right? But the problem is, guys, this shiny Pokemon, it doesn't mean anything to me. I got this thing when I was like 23 or even older, 25, and I didn't even level it up to level 100. I after it hatched, I just ran it through the Elite Four a couple times. It got up to level 63 and I never really used it again. And it just doesn't mean anything to me. And it is nowhere as valuable as this Fireball could ever be because it doesn't have the sentimental attachment. It's not my Charizard. It's just the shiny Charizard. And so now I'm stuck in this scenario where I either have to decide to have the ultimate all shiny team or I have to have my Charizard. And either of these choices feels wrong to me because I don't get to have the ultimate team or I don't get to have the Pokemon that I care the most about, right? And this quite literally has the ability to ruin the entire game for me. Because when I go into new games, what happens is at the very beginning, I'm thinking, all these Pokemon I'm collecting are eventually going to become obsolete because I'm going to have to get a shiny version. And therefore, I should not bond with them because these are going to be replaced. And it makes them all feel kind of... It's just like rentals, and it's not like it's like they're kind of worthless. I'm going to throw them away later, and this makes the entire game feel kind of worthless. But then when I actually do get the shiny, I haven't bonded with it, and there's no story left to do, and there's nothing to bond with it with, right? And then in the next game, it's new Pokemon, and there's no content, and there's no way to bond with it at all. And then I don't even really want to use it, and I'm stuck in this position where the whole game has been ruined because in the beginning, all my Pokemon were worthless and going to become replaced by shinies. And then I get the shinies and there's nothing to do with them. And I'm not attached to them. And I don't want to keep playing. And it really destroys it. And what I want more than anything is I want to be able to go, you see these teams here. I want to take these teams and level them up so much higher. Spend hundreds of hours leveling them up, training them up with the Pokemon I care about the most. And I want them to become the ultimate form, the rarest form of what they are. And so there must be a way to where you can transfer or combine the rare attributes of these other versions into the one that you've actually bonded with, the one that you actually care about, right? Where I can combine this shiny into my Fireball, right? And the beautiful thing about this is it doesn't take anything away from what we have because you still have to shiny hunt. You still get the excitement of shiny hunting. It just means that when you get the shiny, you actually have the shiny on the Pokemon that you care about, that you went on the journey with, and that you bonded with. And so to conclude this Pokemon, if you guys could create a game where we take our Pokemon home and we increase the subscription price, and we have all the Pokemon in it, and you can continue leveling them up beyond level 100, and you add a second layer of competitive Pokemon, where it's competitive because you take your favorite Pokemon and you level them up as high as you can, and you make them the rarest version of them possible and merge the shinies into them or whatever other attributes. I'm telling you guys, that would become the best Pokemon game that has ever been released, and the most profitable Pokemon game that has ever been released in consistent, predictable, recurring revenue. And I humbly and sincerely provide this feedback to you and request that my fireball, which I have these beautiful memories of named after my dog, can have some content created for it after all these years. Thank you so much for listening, and I wish you happy catching.